Right, we now come to questions to the Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing Communities. Bob Blackman.
Question number 1, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With your permission, I will take questions 1 and 17 together. We are investing almost £2.4 billion over 3 years to tackle homelessness and rough sleeping. These are unprecedented amounts. This includes over £1.2 billion through the Homelessness Prevention Grant, which councils can use flexibly to prevent homelessness and to help families move out of temporary accommodation. Last week, an additional £107 million was allocated to councils through the Single Homelessness Accommodation Programme, providing 808 homes for people sleeping rough.
Well, Blackman.
I thank my honourable friend for that answer, but clearly the number of people in temporary accommodation has risen by 10% in the last year, the number of rough sleepers by 27% across the country. So clearly the money is very much needed, and London councils all report that they are spending more than the temporary accommodation money that's been allocated. Equally, across the country, we've seen the pilots for Housing First, which have been outstandingly successful. So can we ensure that Housing First is introduced across the country and more investment is made to take people off the streets and provide a permanent home for them as they deserve?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I'd like to pay tribute to my honourable friend and everything that he has done in the homelessness space. And I was actually looking at the figures at the HRA Act the other day, and we have helped and supported 708,000 families courtesy of that Act to prevent homelessness. You are absolutely right that we did see an uptick in rough sleeping and homelessness, which is disappointing. However, I would say with rough sleeping that we are still below the levels of pre-pandemic levels. We're 9% below those levels and 18% below the highs in 2017. But I agree with my honourable friend about the success of Housing First. We have had pilots. We've invested 42 million in those pilots, and we're investing a further 30 million through the RSI.
Lilian Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There are 142,000 children in temporary accommodation, a record high that's costly to taxpayers but devastating to the lives of children and families. And the government's own data shows it's utterly failed on its 2019 manifesto commitment to end rough sleeping by 2024. As the honourable member opposite has just said, up 27% in the last year, and I'd remind the Minister, 120% higher than in 2010. Is she happy for children and families to be paying the price for 14 years of Tory failure on housing?
This government has got a concerted effort to tackle homelessness and to eliminate rough sleeping. I am not happy with the numbers in temporary accommodation, and that is why at the last autumn statement we saw a series of measures, including an additional £450 million into the Local Authority Housing Fund, taking that to £1.2 billion in order to improve the quality of temporary accommodation. We uprated the local housing allowance to the 30th percentile. That's worth £800 per family.
Speaker, Southend has an abundance of accommodation deemed inexpensive by local authorities, and our city is picking up the tab for social care, education and long-term housing when other local authorities are not informing our city council that they're placing people in the city. All local authorities should give prior notice under section 208 if they're placing people for homelessness within 14 days. Would my right honourable friend assist me and Southend City Council to deal with this issue?
Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely correct that if a borough places people into temporary accommodation outside the borough, then they should notify that borough. So you are absolutely correct, and I am very happy to assist you in getting that message across.
Munira Wilson.
Much, Mr Speaker. Analysis by London councils shows that, on average, the equivalent of one child in every classroom is homeless, and that London local authorities are now spending a staggering £19 million a month on temporary accommodation for those who are homeless. So could I ask the Minister, what conversations has she had with colleagues in the DWP and the Treasury around raising the cap on housing benefit subsidy for temporary accommodation and also supporting local authorities to buy up property, as Richmond Council is doing, so that they can rehouse people locally in decent accommodation?
Hear, hear.
As the Honourable Lady will understand, I cannot talk about any discussions that we may have had with Treasury, but clearly the budget will be on Wednesday. I would point, however, to the increase that we have seen in the LHA rate, and that will take effect in April. And as I said, the Local Authority Housing Fund is specifically to help local authorities buy properties for temporary accommodation.
So, Secretary of State Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hear what the Minister says about the housing fund for temporary accommodation, but what we need to be doing is reducing the amount of families that are in temporary accommodation. 4 years have now passed since the government first promised to end Section 21, and now 70,000 children are coming home from school to sleep in temporary accommodation each night for a child being brought up in a hotel room, doing their homework in a bathroom floor and eating their dinner perched on the bed. The opportunity to make the most of their life is out of their control. So I ask the Minister, how many more children must face eviction before she meets the promise?
Minister.
We are absolutely committed to repealing Section 21. There is no question about that, absolute commitment. In terms of the numbers and temporary accommodation, as I said, those are disappointing, but we do have a very holistic approach, and that is building more housing, building more affordable homes, and enabling local authorities to go out and build and purchase temporary accommodation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 3, if you please.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're transforming communities the length and breadth of our United Kingdom through our £4.8 billion Levelling Up Fund, improving transport, regenerating high streets and rebuilding pride in place.
Giles Watling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for his answer, and I am indeed delighted that recently we've been able to bring some £78 million of investment to Clacton. But going forward, free ports will be a major contributor towards levelling up. And levelling up, in my view, means also transport infrastructure. And not enough is getting through to bus services in my patch. Would my honourable friend agree to support my campaign that outlines that Freeport East in Essex needs to show its social value in Clacton by helping improve connectivity for everyone across the Tending district, and that includes buses?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm more than happy to meet with my honourable friend to discuss his campaign. Buses are the most popular form of public transport in our country. They are an essential part of our national transport system, playing a vital part in levelling up. And I'm grateful to my honourable friend for acknowledging the huge amount of levelling up funding going into Clacton, and I'm keen to work with him to see how we can help people in Jaywick as well.
Dave McHillier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my borough, Hackney, bid for and was successful in getting a levelling up fund bid, but because of a delay to the bid being put in, because the government changed the timetable, and the delay to the final decision again because the government delayed the timetable, that's contributed, not the only factor, but it's contributed to a 9-month delay in the programme and in getting the funding. Will the Minister look at this? And given it's a government flagship programme, isn't he a bit disappointed that some of the problems on the timescale are down to his own department?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will absolutely commit to looking at that. We've obviously introduced the project adjustment request process, and I'm more than happy to talk with her and her local authority about how they can utilise that to meet the changes that she outlines.
David Mundell.
Does my honourable friend agree with me that the great strength of levelling up funding is that it supports projects that are generated by local communities rather than by officialdom, and therefore when the Borders Levelling Up Partnership is considering projects, that the project at the Crook Inn at Tweedsmuir in my constituency and at the George Hotel in Walkerburn are ideal for such funding opportunities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was really grateful to meet with my honourable friend recently to discuss those exact priorities. We're hoping to invest £20 million into the Levelling Up Partnership he mentions, and I'm sure that those priorities will be part of our considerations as we design the partnership.
Samuel Wilson.
Mr. Speaker. The communities in Northern Ireland experienced no benefit from the last round of levelling up funding on the flimsy excuse from the government that the Assembly was not sitting. Now that the Assembly is sitting, can the Minister tell us what discussions he has had with the Communities Minister to ensure that the millions of pounds which he said was set aside will be available for projects in Northern Ireland?
Minister.
I can absolutely commit to having those discussions, and I offer to meet with the honourable gentleman following this session.
Dame Andrew.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm proud that Morley has received £24 million funding of the Conservative government. I'm sure my right honourable friend agrees that transparency and care with taxpayers' money is vital. Well, would the Minister look into the concerns that a number of constituents have raised about my Morley Town Council, including the controversial plan to install 80,000 worth of TV screens in a conservation area, whether it followed correct tendering process and whether any vested interest of those involved were fully declared?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I will absolutely look into those concerns, and I shall ensure that my officials are able to meet with the honourable lady to discuss those further.
Greenwood.
Thank you. The success or otherwise of levelling up will be tested by whether or not people and communities feel better off, and whether inequalities in those communities are removed. So what assessment has the Minister made of an area like Tameside, which has had 3 successful levelling up bids, but which feels poorer because its council is £200 million worse off?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, across the North West we're investing £2.2 billion through our different levelling up fund streams, and I would say to the honourable gentleman that we're working closely with the Mayor of Greater Manchester, giving him more powers and more funding to help deal with the exact issues he mentions.
Shadow Minister Jim McMahon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The government talk about levelling up, but local councils and communities are on the brink due to policies made in Downing Street that affect every single local authority in the country. Funding has been slashed, the Fair Funding Review delayed, the business rate reset postponed, reserves are depleted, community assets have been sold, accounts go unsubmitted, and more councils are lining up for emergency support. So isn't it time to end the sticking plaster politics and have a long-term plan for all of our communities' sake? Or is the government doing as a country is and waiting for the Labour government?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'm sorry that the honourable gentleman failed to mention the long-term plan for Oldham, which is in his very constituency. We're investing £20 million over the next 10 years. Since 2019, we've invested £15 billion of levelling up funding across the country. We're committed to levelling up right across the country.
Toby Perkins.
Number 5, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We have made available up to £64.7 billion for local authorities through the 24-25 local government finance settlement, and of course local authorities can decide how to spend the majority of this funding. The government is also investing more than £5 billion into local highways maintenance this Parliament, and in October we announced a further £8 billion to fix our roads.
Toby Perkins.
Well, Go Compare's recent pothole report described the potholes in Tory-run Derbyshire as the very worst in England. The Conservative council leader was very clear of his view that it's funding decisions from central government that have forced the county to adopt the totally ineffective, in his words, sticking plaster and patching approach. He said the funding from government doesn't touch the sides of the issues for counties across the country. So why should Derbyshire motorists pay a Tory pothole tax with tyres, springs and suspensions all constantly needing repairing as a result of the state of our roads?
Well, let me just say, let me repeat for the benefit of the honourable gentleman, the member for Chesterfield, £5 billion for local highways maintenance and £8 billion in addition announced in October. That is going to fill holes, including those in Derbyshire and his constituency, to support motorists, to support the economy and people going about their business.
Mr Speaker, it's normal in these circumstances to invite a minister to visit a constituency, and the minister is very welcome to visit my constituency, the Wrekin in Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin. But can I suggest if he does, in the Telford and Wrekin borough bit, could he bring a spare tyre? Because the potholes there are absolutely enormous. But can I thank the Minister for allowing £32 million to be released over the next 11 years to ensure that those potholes are filled. And rather than a pothole tax, can I thank you for the pothole fund? And finally, can I just say that if, I won't say it finally, but he's very welcome, bring a spare tyre.
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I struggle with my Lenten observations, I need no lessons about spare tyres. It's all about trying to get rid of spare tyres, as far as I'm concerned. But I'm grateful to the comments made by my right honourable friend, the member for the Wrekin. It's a part of the county of Shropshire which I know well. Those sums can be used and should be used by upper-tier authorities, who are the Highways Authority, to make sure that their networks are working well, smoothly and safely. That benefits all, and this government is putting up the money to allow them to do it.
So, Secretary of State Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Public service workers and local leaders across the country are working incredibly hard to improve their local area and provide vital services. So rather than the begging bowl culture that makes them bid for money, will he take forward Labour's commitment for a long-term, more secure funding settlement so that they can plan for the future?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm intrigued by what the Right Honourable Lady proffers to the House, because it was only a few weeks ago when her honourable friend sitting next to her, the member for Blaydon, said this in the debate on the local government finance settlement. And apart from the honourable lady, the member for York, and the honourable gentleman who chairs the Select Committee, none of her colleagues, apart from her front bench, could be bothered to turn up and speak on it. And what did the honourable lady promise us? As I will come on to say shortly, we will have a review to look at the long-term plans. We understand the problems that local government is facing. Can I say to the Right Honourable Lady, part of the job of being in opposition is to work out the policies that she may want to deliver in government.
Peter Grant.
An extreme right-wing Conservative MP... question 6, I beg your pardon.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have been clear that anti-Muslim hatred has absolutely no place in our communities, and I feel this very strongly representing one of the most diverse constituencies in the country. We have provided over £6 million to the Anti-Muslim Hatred Monitoring and Support Service, Tel Mama, and just shy of £30 million to schemes protecting mosques and faith schools. Funding for both measures has been uplifted in response to increased reporting since October.
Peter Grant.
Take two. An extreme right-wing Conservative MP was allowed to go on an extreme right-wing Conservative funding TV station and make a series of vile Islamophobic remarks. The MP wasn't suspended for Islamophobia. He was suspended for refusing to obey an order from his party leader. Does the Minister understand why it is that not only among Muslim communities but across a much wider range of believers and non-believers, people are becoming increasingly concerned that in the eyes of this government, Islamophobia is somehow being seen as less abhorrent than other forms of racism?
The government was absolutely clear that those comments were not appropriate comments, and that is completely clear. Any form of religious hatred is not acceptable in our society.
The recent rise in anti-Muslim hate incidents and crimes is really worrying, and will the government do everything it can to improve education, to improve multi-faith understanding and tackle this scourge?
Minister.
My right honourable friend makes a very good point. I think education is critical and we need to bring our communities together. Last weekend I was delighted to attend an interfaith event in my constituency which included Holland Park Synagogue, where it was hosted, and Almanar Mosque. And I think that interfaith work and communities working together is critically important.
Shadow Minister List-West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But for almost 2 years, this Tory government has failed to appoint an independent adviser on Islamophobia. The former adviser has since criticised the government for their failure to engage, revealing that he couldn't even get them to provide terms of reference for his role. Does the Minister agree with me that this government lacks the political will to tackle this pernicious hatred, or even to call it out?
I strongly disagree with the Honourable Lady, and I just like to let you know that we do plan to appoint a new independent advisor on anti-Muslim hatred, and we will be updating the House shortly.
SNP spokesperson Anna Kaiser.
I, like so many, am fearful that the inability to call out Islamophobia becomes essentially a scaremongering tactic used to stoke fear and division, garner support for the extreme far right, and makes life difficult or even dangerous for Muslims. Across all four nations, more can and should be done on a cross-party basis to tackle this hatred. This starts by being able to call out Islamophobia when it occurs. So can the Minister clarify what's the line between being wrong and being Islamophobic?
Minister.
Look, there is absolutely no question that those comments were wrong. I face the Mayor of London in opposition all of the time, and I can criticise him for so many things. I can criticise him on housing, on policing, on fire, on transport, but I would never ever accuse him of being in any way under the influence of Islamists.
Anna Kaiser.
That response will give people very little comfort. Let me paint a picture for the Minister of what life is like for many Muslims growing up and living across all these four nations. A month after the 9/11 attacks in 2001, my local mosque in Carfin was petrol-bombed. The two men were sentenced to 1 year and 9 months, respectively. And ask most Muslims, they'll have their own stories. Muslims aren't asking for special treatment. They work, they pay their taxes, they send their kids to the same schools and support the same football teams. And whilst the government have had ample opportunity over the last few weeks to commit to tackling this stain on society, there's been no substantial change in policy. Friday the 15th of March next week marks UN's International Day to Combat Islamophobia. So will the government use this opportunity by committing to the adoption of the APPG definition?
I want to make it very clear that this government will not tolerate religious hatred towards Muslims or any other faith group, and that is absolutely clear and a red line. I also want to make it very clear that this government is aware, very sadly, of incidents of anti-Muslim hatred, and that is why we put in place an extra £4.9 million of protective security funding for Muslim mosques, faith schools and communities. We are absolutely 100% behind our Muslim communities.
Number 7, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I will take questions 7, 9, 14 and 23 together. The Department publishes official statistics on homelessness duties owed, including the number of households that are threatened with homelessness following service of a valid Section 21 notice. We are committed to the abolition of Section 21 through our landmark Renters Reform Bill, which will deliver a fairer private rented sector for both tenants and landlords.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In 2019, the government promised to abolish Section 21 no-fault evictions, but the bill that he was talking about, that they've come up with, finally published 5 years later, does not actually abolish Section 21 no-fault evictions. Meanwhile, 140,000 children are living in costly temporary accommodation, and it's now in Wallasey, in my own constituency, we're getting 1 or 2 cases every week of this happening. The problems are piling up, so when is this government going to do what it promised? Stop delaying, stop dithering and abolish no-fault evictions.
Minister. Mr. Speaker, as I've already said, we're absolutely committed to abolishing Section 21. We've got the Renters Reform Bill that's going through the House of Commons at the moment, and I'm looking forward to debating with her when it returns to this House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my borough of Enfield topped London's league for Section 21 evictions last year, setting a grim record and resulting in a dramatic rise in homelessness, homeless families approaching the council for help. At its peak, the borough had 400 families approached the council for help in 1 month. Yet the government ministers are unwilling to stand up to their own backbenchers on this. The minister says they are committed to abolishing this. Can I please ask him, when will you bring the bill back to this House so we can bring an end to no-fault evictions?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I pay tribute to the Honourable Lady, who I've heard campaigning on this issue a number of times, and I'm well aware of her concerns for her constituents, and as I've already said, we are absolutely committed to abolishing Section 21. We'll bring forward the bill as soon as we're able to. But what I would also say to her is the Mayor of London is not building enough homes. They're not building homes to the government's assessed need for London. He's not even building homes to his own targets. So I would encourage her to have a conversation with him as well.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Salford, from April to November last year, approximately 466 individuals presented to Salford City Council in crisis because of Section 21 notices. But Salford's social housing waiting list is currently in the thousands. Private market rents are outstripping incomes and local housing allowance rates at a frighteningly exponential rate. And because there are no affordable homes to go to once you're evicted from a property, homelessness levels are now at acute levels in Salford. This isn't just a housing crisis now, this is a homelessness crisis in Salford. So when is the government going to bring back the Renters Reform Bill with robust amendments to finally ban Section 21 evictions? And what action is the Minister going to take to ensure my constituents urgently have long-term secure tenancies?
Mr. Speaker, again, I've heard the Honourable Lady talk about this issue a number of times. We are absolutely committed to the abolition of Section 21. I'm personally committed to that, and we will bring back the bill as soon as we're able to.
Shall the Minister Matthew Pellicock?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In resisting Labour's efforts to strengthen the Renters Reform Bill, ministers have repeatedly argued that the legislation as drafted strikes precisely the right balance between the interests of tenants and those of landlords. And yet, by watering down protections for renters and further delaying the long overdue abolition of Section 21 evictions, the package of draft government amendments to the bill that we saw last week will tilt the playing field decisively back toward the landlord interest. Are we to believe, Minister, that the government have honestly decided at the 11th hour that it is landlords that need more rights and powers? Or isn't this simply a crude attempt to manage an increasingly fractious Tory party at a shameful cost to hard-pressed private tenants?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable gentleman, like various members who've already spoken, is a committed campaigner on this issue, and I enjoyed our time together in committee for this bill. I would say to him that we need to strike that balance, the very balance that he's just spoken about. That's why we're discussing the bill with both landlord groups and tenant groups. We're meeting with colleagues on my side of the House, we're meeting with colleagues on his side of the House and the smaller parties as well. We're ensuring that when we bring this bill back, it is in the best possible shape so that it affords those protections and that security for tenants, but protections and fairness for landlords too.
Mohammed Yassin.
8, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for Bedford for his question. I'm pleased to report that the review of the flood recovery framework has already begun, and that I expect this work to be completed by the autumn of this year. We will, of course, update Parliament in the usual way when that review is completed.
Mohammed Yassin.
Thank you. My constituent Lucy owns ride layer events on Wyboston Lake, which flooded again during Storm Hank. She can't get insurance, and her business isn't entitled to compensation under the flood recovery framework because of the government's arbitrary decision to expect cash-strapped councils to cover the cost if fewer than 50 properties are impacted. This is very unfair that my constituent has fallen through the safety net. She won't be the only one, with property in Kensington regularly being impacted by flooding. So will the Minister correct this anomaly in the framework and help my constituents save her business?
Minister.
Well, I'm sorry to hear of the case that the honourable gentleman has brought before the House, and if he wishes to write to me with the details of the business, I will, of course, look into it. In relation, Mr. Speaker, to Storm Heng, 2,241 properties have been identified as being eligible for grant support. That covers 16 upper-tier local authorities, and to date £788,743 have been reported by local authorities to impacted householders and businesses. There always has to be a rubric to these things. There always has to be, but in part that is what will be looked at during the Flood Recovery Framework review, and as I say, we will report that to the House. But the offer is there. If the Honourable Gentleman wishes to write to me, I will very happily look at what he has to say.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. Whiston has been flooded repeatedly over the last decade. And there's a huge ongoing issue. Now, recently, the Council has approved 450 new homes in Whiston. Now, Whiston Parish Council, which is independently aligned, so not party political, has actually called a special public meeting about these plans, because the plans to those homes by Rotherham Council show water running uphill, which I believe it doesn't run uphill, take it away, and on top of it, it also shows floodwater draining away into a non-existent stream, surely showing that the Rotherham Council don't actually understand the flooding issue. Does agree with me that Rotherham Council and all councils have a responsibility to not be building on the floodplain?
Minister?
Well, Mr Speaker, my honourable friend raises an important point, and between the local planning authority and the Environment Agency, between the two bodies, they should always find the most appropriate sites for development and take hydrology and water management into very clear consideration. My honourable friend, the Planning Minister, will have heard what my honourable friend has raised and may be contacting him in due course.
Alistair Stratton.
Number 10, please, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
On the specific adoption of roads, this is largely an issue for my right honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, and he leads on that policy. However, I know, because we've spoken about this in committee, that the honourable gentleman has a significant interest in this area, and we understand the strength of feeling on this issue, and we are considering the matter further.
Alistair Stratton.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Now, across the country, homeowners in estate adoption limbo are being left exposed to exploitative and often unaccountable management companies. Despite their warm words, sadly, the government didn't bring forward any of the actions the CMA urged to end the issue of freehold once and for all. Now, with the Secretary of State rumoured to be on the lookout for legacy accomplishments, will the Minister urge colleagues to finally act on this issue in this Parliament, or will freehold be an issue yet again left to the next government to tackle it? With the best will of the world to the honourable gentleman from Mid-Bedfordshire, the CMA report was published a few days ago, and the leasehold bill has been progressing through this House for a number of months before that. But on the specific point, I hope he would accept, as other members in the House have done so, including on his benches, that the leasehold bill is a significant improvement for estate management, the right of redress to tribunal, further information, the right of absolute clarity on service charge, all of which have been demanded and asked for quite rightly by residents, and we are bringing forward changes. And I say we are considering very carefully whether there's anything further we can do.
Tom Hull.
To number 11, Mr Speaker.
My department is engaging with all town deal recipients to support delivery through our performance monitoring process, and we have a particular interest in progress in Ipswich, following the allocation of £25 million secured by the member for Ipswich for 10 projects in Ipswich.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'm very grateful for that investment. The Secretary of State will know that my honourable friend and member for Bishop Auckland had to intervene because of the slow production of the business cases. We got over that hurdle. However, sadly, years later, we're still desperately waiting for delivery on the ground. When it's bodies other than the Labour-led council responsible for projects, they get delivered. No problem. But when it's a Labour-led council in the driving seat, what we see is no delivery. Whether it is cock-up or conspiracy, it's not good enough. Will the Secretary of State please intervene to let them know that it's not right to put politics before the delivery that Ipswich people desperately need?
Well, my honourable friend is a bonny factor for Ipswich, and he's absolutely right on the local shopping parades project and also the former Paul's silo building. I'm afraid we have not seen the progress that we would expect, and it's simply the case that the Labour Council in Ipswich is not delivering for the people of Ipswich in the way that he so brilliantly does.
Mr
Speaker, I thought the Secretary of State's government was introducing all these deals in order to help parts of the country that were struggling, where more people who have less earnings live. I have been, like him, I have been watching very carefully who's getting the money. How come so much of the money goes to Tory marginal seats? Is that fair?
Well, firstly, Ipswich is an area that deserves investment, an area that has been overlooked and undervalued under Labour governments. Secondly, On Friday, I was proud to be able to announce additional investment in a mass transit system which will enable his constituents in Huddersfield to travel more quickly across West Yorkshire to Leeds and Bradford. It is the case, sadly, at the moment, that we don't have Conservative MPs in Leeds or Bradford, but we do know that the Labour marginal seats in Leeds and Bradford, and of course the marginal seat of Huddersfield, will very soon have Conservative representation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 12, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I will take questions 12 and 22 together. Our £150 million Community Ownership Fund is open to voluntary and community organisations or parish, town and community councils from all parts of the United Kingdom who have a viable plan for taking ownership of a community asset at risk and running it sustainably for community benefit. So far, we've awarded £71 million to 257 community projects, including £1 million to Gig Lane, the home of Bury FC. Detailed guidance on criteria is available in the prospectus on gov.uk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Silkstone Common Methodist Church in my constituency hasn't been used for worship for some time, but it's a really important community space where a wide range of community groups meet regularly. Now, sadly, I understand that the Methodist Church may now sell the building, threatening the future of these groups, but the Parish Council, Silkstone Parish Council, have managed to have the building listed as an asset of community value. So could my honourable friend tell me whether the Community Ownership Fund might be a suitable source of funding to secure the future of the building, or what other funds the Parish Council should indeed be looking at?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I can confirm it sounds as though it's eligible, but I'm happy to meet with her to discuss eligibility further. Applicants can bid up to £2 million in capital funding from the Community Ownership Fund, with revenue funding available in addition to this. But in the first instance, I would recommend that interested applicants read the prospectus on gov.uk, as this will cover all they need to know regarding eligibility requirements, funding available and the application progress.
Much, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend consider amending the criteria for Community Ownership Fund applications to include the potential community purchase of redundant council assets, which would bring back to life many publicly owned buildings and spaces which are currently serving no purpose or are underused?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his advocacy for the fund, as well as for his constituents in Bury. The Community Ownership Fund works alongside existing community asset transfers to support these by funding costs of renovation and refurbishment. We can't fund the cost of purchasing publicly owned assets where the public authority would credit a capital receipt, except in the case of parish, town and community councils, but I'm happy to meet with him to discuss this further.
Tim Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In many communities in Westmoreland, the pub is the centre of that community and often is under threat. In some cases, that pub, such as the Ship at Sandside, has closed down altogether. Community Ownership Fund clearly is a very good way of being able to allow the community to bring those businesses back into public use. But does the fund allow communities to go through the process of compulsory purchase so that a building can be taken from an owner who is unwilling to sell, so it can then be made useful again for the local community?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the CPO process is probably a little bit too lengthy for the fund itself, but I'm happy to meet with him to discuss the project directly. We're very happy to help fund community pubs through the Community Ownership Fund.
Thank you. The Citizens Theatre in Glasgow is a much beloved institution and has been undergoing refurbishment over several years now. They've had a range of funding from Glasgow City Council, the Scottish Government, Historic Environment Scotland, but due to inflation and other measures still require additional funding to make up the balance to complete this really significant refurbishment programme. Is the Community Ownership Fund something that the Citizens Theatre might be able to avail themselves of?
Minister. Mr. Speaker, once again, I think it sounds as though it may be eligible, but I can't comment exactly on eligibility today, but I'm happy to meet with the Honourable Lady to discuss whether this fund is appropriate for her Citizens Theatre.
Nigel Mills.
Number 13, please.
Secretary of State.
We've made available up to £64.7 billion for local authorities through the Local Government Finance Settlement for 2024-25. That's an above-inflation increase of up to £4.5 billion, or 7.5% in cash terms, on 2023-24. And of course, this includes an additional £600 million of funding, which was announced by my honourable friend, the Member for Local Government, on the 24th of January.
Thank you for that answer. Aside from potholes, the issue that's caused the most angst for Derbyshire County Council is the significant rise in the costs
of residential placements for looked after children. And the council believe that the market fat is now completely out of control and prices are excessive. Is there more the government can do to help councils financially to pay these bills, or find a better way of structuring that market so the bills are not so high?
Well, my honourable friend raises a very important point. I mean, it is the case that we're spending £500 billion additionally, £1 million, forgive me, on adult and children's social care. But he's absolutely right. The cost of residential homes for looked after children is excessive, and there are a number of private equity firms that are operating like bandits in this area. And I have talked to the minister responsible, the member for Wantage. Action will be forthcoming.
Chair of the Select Committee, Clive Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Select Committee recently produced a report on local government finance, and we said the government must act now if local authorities are to survive the severe crisis. What has the Secretary of State done? He's asked every local authority to produce a productivity plan. It sounds a bit like him advising councils how to spend better the money they haven't got. In particular, he's asked local authorities to identify ways to reduce wasteful spend. What does he think local authorities have been doing for the last 13 years? And even more in particular, to ask them to identify waste on discredited staff equality, diversity and inclusion programmes. How much does he think that's going to save towards avoiding Section 114 notices?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Chairman of the Select Committee, and he's right, of course. There are challenges that local government faces, but there are outstanding councils, like, for example, North Lincolnshire or South Norfolk, that are continuing to ensure that they can build up surpluses and deliver effective services, and that's because they put productivity first. There are some local authorities, lamentably, that are not putting productivity first, like South Cambridgeshire with its plans for a 4-day week, or St Albans, which is still spending money on discredited forms of training that are doing the increased division rather than bringing communities together. And it's no coincidence that both of those local authorities are Liberal Democrat.
Question 16, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Where landlords fail to keep their properties in an acceptable condition, local authorities can issue improvement notices and impose penalties for non-compliance. Social tenants can already access the Housing Ombudsman Service, and the Renters Reform Bill will establish a new Landlord Ombudsman Service so private tenants can also seek free redress.
Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his answer. Whilst these changes in legislation are welcome, it is clear that more must be done. Too many rental and leasehold residents in Uxbridge and South Ruislip face ongoing issues in ensuring landlords and freeholders face up to their responsibilities. Will the Minister work with me to ensure that my residents in such precarious situations with unresponsive landlords and leaseholders are able to access the correct course of remedial action in a timely and effective manner?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will indeed work with my honourable friend to ensure that his residents, which he is such a brilliant champion for, can access redress. We are committed to protecting tenants from the minority of landlords and agents who provide a poor service. Where a property is managed by an agent, residents can seek redress through the Property Ombudsman or the Property Redress Scheme, as well as the Housing Ombudsman for social tenants and the new Ombudsman for private tenants. The Leasehold and Freehold Reform Bill will require freeholders who manage their property to join a redress scheme too.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Too many children across the country are still being hospitalised because of mould in their private rented homes. Repairs and concerns, especially about mould, are the subject of AWAB's law, which is being brought in, but private landlords are being left off the hook. Will the Minister consider supporting my private member's bill to extend AWAB's law and ensure that private landlords hold up their responsibilities to fix mould?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for the time that we've spent together discussing her private member's bill. Through the Renters Reform Bill, we're introducing a new decent home standard for the private rented sector, which I believe covers the majority of her bill, but I'm happy to continue the discussions further with her.
18, please.
Secretary of State.
My department is supporting the implementation of the Norfolk devolution deal, which is progressing well. Norfolk County Council, under its brilliant leader, intends to vote to change its governance in July, leading to the election of a directly elected leader in May 2025.
Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The budget in a couple of days has got two things it could do for Norfolk. Firstly, we could announce the county deal and give Norfolk control of its future. But even more importantly than that, it could provide the vehicle for my Sheringham roundabout, which the Minister knows all about, which will be wonderful for my North Norfolk constituency. So the question to the Minister is, has he convinced the Chancellor to announce it yet?
Well, I can't reveal the nature of any discussions that I've had with the member for Surrey South West, but Sheringham Roundabout is one of the single most important infrastructure investments in Norfolk. The member for North Norfolk has made the case convincingly to me, and I hope that we'll be able to get motoring on it before too long.
That's been correct.
Thank you. Number 19, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our £11.5 billion affordable housing programme will deliver thousands of affordable homes for both rent and to buy right across the country. The Levelling Up White Paper committed to increasing the supply of social rented homes, and a large number of the new homes delivered through our affordable homes programme will be for social rent.
That's been correct.
Mr. Speaker, in Bolton, 20,000 people are on a housing waiting list. For a 3-bedroom house, it's an 18-month wait, and on average, 800 to 900 people apply for each home that comes up. Families are often referred into the private central sector, which they are not able to afford, as because we know the rents are sky high. After 14 years of this Tory government, which has actually failed to build affordable homes, will the Minister now apologise to my constituents stuck in temporary accommodation?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Lady mentions the last 14 years. Well, since 2010, we have delivered over 696,000 new affordable homes, including over 482,000 affordable homes for rent, of which 172,000 homes are for social rent as well. We're committed to building more homes for people just like her constituents.
We now come to topicals. Debbie Abrahams.
T1, Mr. Speaker.
Stay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On Friday at the Convention for the North, I was delighted to be able to confirm enhanced devolution deals for the Liverpool City region, West Yorkshire and South Yorkshire, and also additional investment in Blackpool, Sheffield and Blackburn, including £1.5 million for Tony's Empress Ballroom, which, as you will know, Mr. Speaker, is an iconic Northern Soul dance floor. I look forward to visiting it soon with you and with the Shadow Secretary of State.
On the floor tonight, Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I had a constituent who came to a surgery of mine recently with her 7-year-old son to show some appalling photographs of the private rented accommodation that they live in. The little boy asked me, with thick mould in his bedroom, if he was going to die. So given the recent remarks by the Housing Ombudsman, and particularly emphasising the link between housing conditions and health, what urgent action is he going to take to address the appalling situation with private rented health?
Well, we will shortly be saying more about the Decent Home Standard and the extension of Ombudsman powers to deal with precisely the sorts of situations that she quite rightly raises.
Dr. Therese Cotton.
Since the last ELUC questions, my local association, Flagship New Tide, have sold off 3 more homes in Aldborough at auction. However, the same housing association is failing to take action on antisocial behaviour that's happening to several of my constituents in Saxmundham. What powers can we apply to make sure that people who do the right thing, want to live in their home peacefully, are not surrounded by people dealing drugs, breeding illegally pets, and making sure that other people's lives are in misery?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tackling antisocial behaviour is a priority for this government, and that's why we've published our antisocial behaviour action plan, backed with £160 million of new funding. We've committed to a 3 strikes and you're out ASB policy, and landlords will be expected to evict tenants whose behaviour is disruptive to neighbours. From the 1st of April, my honourable friend will be pleased to know, this regulator of social housing will require registered providers of social housing to work with the appropriate local authority departments, the police and other relevant organisations to tackle antisocial behaviour.
Minister Florence Session-Lerman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week's budget will be a big one for young people, 16 and 17-year-olds, who are probably starting work or making those important education choices. Yet, they currently have no say on who the next government's going to be. On this side of the House, we believe in our young people. So will the government act now and give 16 and 17-year-olds a say in the next general election?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady makes a case for lowering the voting age. It's one I don't support. It's one that the government doesn't support. The age of 18 is seen as the age of maturity in this country and in many other countries across the world. It seems to have served us pretty well up until now, and I see no particular reason to change it.
Marco Longhi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister join me in congratulating South Staffordshire District Council for serving an enforcement notice to rebuild the Crooked House pub? Will he also look favourably at measures I will be bringing forward to ensure that heritage pubs are better protected? Because, as he will know, the Crooked House and many others had no protections at all.
Well, my honourable friend makes a very important case and makes a very important argument. And the case of Crooked House, I think, reinforces what he has long campaigned for, which is better protection for heritage pubs. And I look forward to working with him and Lord Mendoza to achieve just that.
Dr. Rupert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State is a strong supporter of green urban spaces. So will he urgently meet with me to discuss the ancient Haven Green, currently under threat, on which he is due to decide soon?
Well, obviously, I can't speak to the Honourable Lady about specific planning applications, and I do cherish urban green spaces, but I also cherish more homes being built in London, and it would be regrettable. It would be regrettable if the Honourable Lady were to be a blocker, not a builder.
Jen Stevens.
Mr. Speaker, since my election, I've urged Wolverhampton City Council to focus on city centre living to bring footfall back to our city centre. What more can government do? I'm delighted the council are now changing their plans, but how can we get upper storeys converted as well to really bring that footfall back?
Well, my honourable friend is a brilliant champion for Wolverhampton and for Wolframians everywhere, and in particular, she has been the single most effective voice in attracting investment to the heart of Wolverhampton. But she's right, as well as commercial investment, we need new residential opportunities, and our extension of permitted development rights should provide just that.
Chris Stevens.
Thank you. Can the Minister for the Union tell me what discussions he has had with devolved administrations and what discussions he's had with the Chancellor on the very important matter of infected blood compensation? And does he recognise the frustration and dismay from many campaigners as to the delays and almost a year they've waited since Sir Brian Langstaff reported on his compensation framework?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman raises a very, very important point, and those who have suffered as a result of the infected blood scandal are, of course, in the forefront of our minds. It's directly a Cabinet Office responsibility, but I know from my time in the Cabinet Office how seriously the ministers charged with this responsibility take it, and I will talk to them and indeed update devolved administrations on progress towards appropriate compensation.
Neil O'Brien.
The government's to be commended for taking through the first leasehold reforms for 20 years. But as the bill now goes to the Lords, will ministers go further and agree, firstly, to empower the 3 to 4 million people trapped on leasehold estates, and secondly, to fundamentally end this scammy, dodgy, corrupt model once and for all?
My honourable friend makes an important point about making sure that we strike the right balance here. We have brought forward significant reforms as is already in the bill, but I'm happy to continue to talk to my honourable friend and other members of this House who are interested in this, and the government continues to look at what more can be done.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week we saw, for a second year running, rough sleeping numbers up by over a quarter. That's a lot of people to criminalise if the criminal justice bill remains unamended. Over 100,000 households, including 140,000 children, find themselves stuck in temporary accommodation. Yet the mere mention of temporary accommodation sees ministers pivot away from the subject entirely. This should be a source of shame for this government. So where is the national plan to end all forms of homelessness? Because I sincerely hope it's not in the same place as their plan for ending Section 21 evictions, Mr. Speaker.
This government has got a very clear plan. We introduced it last year, ending rough sleeping for good. We announced £2 billion behind it. It is now £2.4 billion. It is unprecedented amounts of money that we are giving to this very important task.
James Morris.
The Hayden Hill Leisure Centre in my constituency is to be part rebuilt and part refurbished by a £20 million investment from the Levelling Up Fund. Would the Minister agree with me that DLUC need to continue to be engaged with the local authority who are appointing contractors to make sure that this project does get delivered on time and on budget?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to the honourable member, who is a fantastic champion for his constituent. I'm happy to meet with him to discuss the delays as soon as we're able to. There is the project adjustment process available to the council if they need to use that.
Judith Cummins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in 2010, total wealth per head in the north of England was 16% less than the rest of England. Last week, the IPPR released a report which estimated that by 2030, this gap will have grown to 21%. Can the Minister confirm that this government's policies have achieved levelling up?
So state.
Well, I was delighted to be in West Yorkshire on Friday outlining the additional investment that we are making in the West Yorkshire region, and the specific agreement that we've reached with the Mayor of West Yorkshire, Tracy Braben, will see significant additional funds going in to help with housing, adult skills and transport, all of which will contribute to a revolution in devolution that has occurred under this Conservative government.
George Freeman.
Rural areas are particularly vulnerable to the high energy costs we've seen in the last 2 years, 150% more vulnerable to fuel poverty. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that councils on the front line of high rural costs are seeing a spate of homelessness? Great councils like Breckland in my patch now spending 50% of their net budget on relief, and would he support me in urging the Chancellor to increase that relief in the budget on Wednesday?
So state.
Well, my right honourable friend makes a very important point. We're concentrating, of course, on making sure that we can level up the North and Midlands, but we also need to recognise that levelling up encompasses making sure that those in rural areas who contribute so much to the life of our nation are also supported through the challenges that the cost of living crisis has generated.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister advise on how many people took up the offer of the former Help to Buy ISA scheme, and whether consideration has been given to another such scheme to allow young people to get on that seemingly impossible first rung of the property ladder?
Minister.
We continue as the government to bring forward as many interventions as we can to support young people to get onto the housing ladder. There's over 800,000 first-time buyers that have managed to do that since 2010. I'm happy to meet with the Honourable Gentleman to talk more about the points he has made.
Thank you, sir. Today, the Charity Commission have issued new guidance for charities who refuse to accept donations. This comes after the RNLI turned down a donation from Dungarvan Foxhounds in the Republic of Ireland. Now, declining a donation from a lawful source may not be consistent with trustees' legal duty to further their charity's purpose. Will my right honourable friend support the right of communities throughout the British Isles to donate to charities of their choice?
Well, my right honourable friend, a former Attorney General, raises a very important point. We want to do everything we can to encourage charitable giving. I will look closely at the case that he mentions, raise it with the Cabinet Office, and of course with the very distinguished Chair of the Charity Commission, who's been doing such a good job, Orlando Fraser-Casey.
Rachel Baskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are businesses in York which haven't been able to trade for over 4 months due to flooding, and the flood recovery framework precludes them from getting funds, whereas in Tory shires they're able to access funds. So will the Minister meet with me to discuss the fact that my businesses can't get any funding, and let's find a way forward so that they do not miss out?
Oh, that's good.
Yes.
Luke Hall.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Councillors will not be covered by the newly passed Neonatal Care Leave and Pay Act, at risk of losing extra responsibility allowances if they have a child who spends time in neonatal care. So will the local government minister issue guidance to councils, asking them to ensure that all parents are protected if they're councillors and find themselves in those most difficult circumstances?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this is a campaign which my honourable friend worked on. We spoke about it last week. I understand entirely the merits of the argument that he's making. So powerful is my honourable friend as an advocate that I have already put in place and in hand work on that in order to deliver what he's talking about.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thinking about the Community Ownership Fund, it is very welcome that the match funding requirement from local organisations has been reduced to 20%. In future rounds, could the criterion around match funding take account of prior investment by the community, such as the very many small donations that people in the Axe Valley area gave to build Seaton Community Hospital?
Very good. So, Steve.
Well, that's a very interesting idea, and I'm very fond of the Axe Valley, so I'll look at it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 1244. That was the date of the first market charter awarded to Wellington in Shropshire in my constituency. In the last 3 years, Mr Speaker, £3 million under the Towns Fund, £10 million under the Levelling Up Fund, and £800,000 under a fund I can't remember. But 3 funds, record investment from this government into Wellington, 800-year-old market town. The council have just taken over, the Labour Council have just taken over the market. Can the Secretary of State please ensure that the council don't mess it up?
We will do everything we can, and Wellington is very lucky to have such a brilliant advocate. I hope that my honourable friend sits on the green benches for many years to come, but when he's translated to another place, he deserves to be the next Duke of Wellington.
Right, that completes questions.